Gave up?
Just gave up. We're done here. Walked away. I thought that was kind of an astonishing moment.
Yeah, I also think it was wise on his part. So that question that he walked away from was asking Mr. Maxwell if he had reviewed the search warrant affidavit to determine whether or not it established probable cause. I'm sure that Mr. Maxwell and his colleagues looked at the search warrant affidavit and the materials that they were given and thought that on their face they're valid and presumed to be valid. And the issue at that point was whether or not Nate Paul and his attorneys were giving the Attorney General's office any evidence that would have put those documents into question, that would have warranted a further investigation, and that's what I think Mr. Maxwell was focused on. So I think Dan Cogdell was smart to just walk away from that question and sort of convey that he was leaving on a high note, even though I'm not sure that's what happened.
Well, I think that's what he hoped was what it would look like, but that's not what it looked like. It looked like he had been defeated by
That's how I took it.
by
I'm just like,
the Ranger.
I'm not going to shake this guy, so I'm just, I don't know. That's my layperson's view of it. Is that
I mean, that's how it came across to me, and I think I agree with you that he was smart to walk away. It was not going well for him.
Well, and I remember from listening to the, I'm trying to remember during the recording if he talked about having reviewed the search warrant. I feel like he did say that because Maxwell's very clear during the interview with Nate Paul, the interviews, that there's nothing here that is to be investigated, and that if there is something to be investigated, that you need to go to the Office of Inspector General. So that was kind of sort of a consistent mantra, even when he was interviewing Paul about what he thought. And he says at one point during the interview with Nate Paul and his attorney that, essentially, if we do this, we'll be obstructing justice, that kind of thing, interfering in a federal, and that's how the feds will view it.
Yeah.
So he's echoing from the stand the same thing I heard him say in the interview with Nate Paul.
Yeah, I thought that the earlier witnesses, Mateer and Bangert, were referencing Nate Paul and his lawyers not providing the Attorney General's office with documents when they were repeatedly requesting them. That portion of the story didn't come out through Mr. Maxwell. I'm just curious as to why they didn't emphasize that, but that was kind of one piece that I would have expected to hear from him.
I think what they were trying to get from him was this metadata, this thing that he claimed was changed. And then he ultimately does provide them with something which...
Well, they did do some forensic work on the document, on the metadata they did do that one piece of it.
I mean, it seems like...
And there was no there.
Right. There was not evidence that something had been changed.
And not with any malfeasance, that it had changed apparently when it was saved as a PDF, that it was a techie change,
right?
Not anything done with nefarious intent.
But like I said, when I watched the interview with Nate Paul and David Maxwell, and then the second one with Penley, Nate Paul's claims they were really hard to follow. I mean, it was like, let's throw some stuff up against the wall and see if they'll investigate.
I guess one thing that keeps occurring to me is, why was this worth it to Ken Paxton to walk along with this man? I mean, was what he got out of it enough? It just seems he was staking a lot on helping Nate Paul. And I mean, of course, we hear that it was to get his mistress moved to Austin, to get her a job. But really? Really?
Yeah, and to me, hearing the testimony from Bangert and Mateer, this idea that in their minds, like, everything seemed to sort of come together when they learned that the Attorney General's mistress was hired by Nate Paul's office. That I do think that provides an explanation, but I agree with you that there has to be more to the story than that the Attorney General wanted to have his mistress get a job so she could be closer to him. Like that seems like not enough to cause someone at such a high position,
or even
if that
to get
happened,
your kitchen redone. I mean, that's just somewhere there must be more.
Yeah, to take this type of action on behalf of Nate Paul, like, you would think that there was something more there that would have encouraged
Yeah.
him to do this.
Well, Bangert testified that, when, I believe it was Bangert, that when, or it could have been Mateer, they're starting to run together in my head, that when they found out about, the mistress, that, he could, like, the light bulb went on. I forget the exact wording of what he used. I don't know, or what they used. They seemed to, connect the dots to her. But you're right, it feels like there's something else. But that's why you go to the feds, right? That's why you go to the FBI and say, y'all figure out. There's a whole lot
There's something going on here.
There's a whole lot of things happening. We don't understand why they're happening.
These seem to be connected, but we don't know for sure. You guys investigate.
Right.
I mean, and if you had been, Ed, if you had these guys, these high-ranking guys from the AG's office come to you and lay this out, what they've experienced, how would you have handled that? What would be the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, this also goes to the lawyer Johnny Sutton, who's been referenced, his decision to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Texas. So you normally, if you have these kinds of witnesses that are willing to go to the government and provide allegations of potential public corruption and bribery, you go to federal authorities. It's interesting in this instance that they went to the Western District of Texas, because to me it's on its face somewhat problematic, because Johnny Sutton was the U.S. Attorney in the Western District of Texas. I think there's a pending case against Nate Paul, I believe, that's being prosecuted out of that district, or some other federal district here in Texas. But the other available avenue would be to go to the DOJ's Public Integrity Section in the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice in D.C. And had they gone there, I think they would have, the case would have been assigned prosecutors and agents, and they could have potentially moved the case along a lot faster. So the fact that they brought the referral internally within Texas U.S. Attorney's Office, I think, is somewhat unusual, and ultimately the case was referred to the Public Integrity Section to take it over, and that's what's happening now. But they could have gone there in the first instance. But the first step in that kind of referral is to meet with the witnesses, interview them, and learn what the allegations are that they have, and gather any documents they might have that would support those allegations. And it sounds like the witnesses didn't personally take the documents and give them to the FBI, that they may have done that through their lawyers, which is what the normal course of how this type of referral will be done.
Well, and one of the things that one of them said, either Mateer or Bangert, said that we were stepping into the void. Right. We didn't have a roadmap for this. I mean, these guys are.
This is unprecedented stuff.
Right, except for David Maxwell, the others seem like kind of more bureaucratic lawyers. They're not really. These are not.
Oh, I think he is the only one that has a in-depth understanding of how all those systems work and how you get into the system and what happens once you are in the system, that things start happening that you don't control anymore.
But overall, how effective do you think David Maxwell was for the prosecution?
I feel like the House managers got their sort of momentum back through him. I mean, the whole point is to present these insiders within the Attorney General's office to explain what they were asked to do, why they refused to do it, and that they had a good reason for it. And I think that Mr. Maxwell kind of established that credibility within the office as to why these people were disagreeing with the Attorney General. So I think they got back on the right track this afternoon.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, because this Vassar's testimony was, Ryan Vassar was, he clearly was not as comfortable.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that what Maxwell does is allow the prosecution to end this first week of the trial on a positive, on an up note, if not a positive note, that it lets the prosecution sort of end this week on top instead of looking.
With Dan Cogdell, when he asked Maxwell about, if you pretend like you don't hear the question, that exchange, what did y'all think of that?
Well,
I thought it was funny, but I mean, how does that play to this?
I thought it was funny, but unnecessary and unkind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Dan Cogdill picked up on the point that when he was asking Mr. Maxwell difficult questions, he was saying, "Can you please repeat the question?" I think he saw that as a tactic, which Mr. Maxwell admitted it was, and he said, "Well, why do you ask that question when you're being asked a question?" And he said, "Well, because Mr. Maxwell said it's because it throws the questioner off." And then I think so. Dan Cogdill, I did think scored a point there. And I do think it's not helpful, even though Mr. Maxwell is trying to be humorous at the end of the day. I don't think it was helpful to him, to be perceived as playing games here in such an important trial. And I think that's why Mr. Maxwell kind of quickly moved off of that and got serious again. And I don't think it really damaged his credibility. It just showed that maybe there was a point where he took the joking maybe a little bit too far and took their relationship, because they know each other, too far. And I think Dan Cogdill kind of seized the moment there.
I think the relationship between the two stepped into that moment, and he leaned into that, and it was too tempting to not lean into it.
Well, and then Cogdill leaned into it
too.
That he teed it up, and then Cogdill was trying to do the home run with it. You're
Yeah. So, but I think in the end, Maxwell prevailed. I do.
Yep.
Yeah, he comes across as believable, as someone who was willing to give up his career.
Yeah.
Because other than he just didn't want to do it, they have no good explanation for why. Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Texas Tribune is reporting they're done for the day. They'll be back at 9 a.m. Monday.
They are done for the day.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, we're gonna wrap it up here too, because it's been a long week. Before we just end, any final takeaways that you guys want to give folks out there?
I am astonished, I have to say, at how many people we've seen watching this online and in various other ways. But I'm also, that encourages me that this many Texans are paying attention to a very important happening about an elected official. I think that's very reassuring.
Yeah, but no, it's an important trial, and I think hopefully the House managers will have enough time to get through all the different witnesses, and I think we're now seeing, new witnesses that have, more insight that can shed light on these allegations, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
Well, I think it promises to be a wild ride. I think it's far from over. So, although we'll see how this shakes out with these time limitations and how all this ends up. But Ed, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah,
Katie,
thank you
it's
for having
always
me.
good to see you, my friend. Well, we'll be wrapping it up for the day, and I will be back at 9 a.m. Monday morning.